We're live. We did it.
We did it.
Hi. So, we're back live for another episode of Self Care is My Job. As usual, I have an awesome guest. Amanda, how are you? How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you? Happy to be here.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you for joining me. Um so yeah, we're able to connect from across the country. I love it. You're all the way out in Southern California, and I'm all the way here, like I was saying, out in Jersey. We were just dealing with a crazy storm out here. So I'm hoping that you guys are enjoying the summer.
We are, as usual. It's like I always joke we have like summer and then summer light, and those are the only.
That's it.
The
That's your
only
that's your seasons.
yes.
That's so beautiful. Love it. So I want to thank you again for joining me. This is going to be an interesting conversation that I have so been looking forward to having. So, this conversation is about sobriety, about not drinking alcohol, to be clear. Now,
Yes.
and I really want to, I'm going to let you kind of like tell us more about what you do and like why this is a thing. So I want to thank you though for your content on Instagram is awesome. Like it's really been inspirational for me to like read some of your stuff. I haven't, just to be clear with listeners and people who are watching right now, it's like I haven't given up alcohol entirely. There are people who are going to be watching this and going, "Hey, Sam used to be in the wine world. Like she still drinks wine. She still partakes." Yes, and I've cut back a lot, a lot. And but this has been like on my mind a lot lately, this entire conversation, especially in regards to motherhood, which we're going to talk about too. To think about getting sober in this stage of life, not even like, like in our 30s, like after all the drinking and partying that we've done in the past and all that, meaning that as far as stage of life, but also in motherhood, right? When shit gets real, like you think life is stressful before kids, and then you have kids and you're like, oh, okay, we're a whole new level of crazy now. So and that's what I mean by like getting sober in this stage of life. So I just want to congratulate you in a way. I want to give you a round of applause, like for real, because even just scratching the surface of cutting way back on my alcohol and becoming, you know, taking a look at some hard truths and becoming hyper aware of this shit, I can tell already that my road to potential sobriety eventually, like, it's hard. This is hard. So I just want to not only say thank you for putting it out into the world the way that you do, because I could see that you do it just, for the benefit of all, to be a, to be a guide, right? And to share your story. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gotta say it. I mean, we have to talk about this shit. So
Yeah.
I do want to know your story. I want to know what happened. What happened, okay? But I will, I know that that ends up being like this long drawn out story, which is fine, by the way. Like if you feel like you're rambling, we ramble on this show. I don't care.
Okay.
But at the same time, I also, yeah, I definitely want to know what prior to October 2020, if there was a something that happened, if there were parts of your life that were suffering, if there were specific things that led you to a point that you said no more. This isn't working for me. And by the way, disclaimer, or whatever, I just want to sort of put a blanket statement out too. This could be a triggering conversation for some people, and that's okay. Like if you feel like attacked in some way, or you're feeling yourself getting defensive listening to this conversation, that's normal. That is completely normal, because we have been taught that alcohol, I mean, like here I am getting into it already, but we'll get further into it. But we have been taught that alcohol is a very acceptable, normal, glamorized, wonderful, fun, awesome part of living as an adult. So when we start to look at hard truths that end up turning that paradigm up on its head, it's very friggin' triggering. So if you feel triggered by this conversation, I want you to know that it is normal, and I will not hold it against you if you cannot go forward, but I will invite you to let that discomfort kind of and sit with it and listen, because it might just spark a little bit of awareness in the back of your head, right? Okay, I won't go any more about that. Now I want to know about you. I want to hear from Amanda. Tell me what happened.
All right. Well, so when I think of my story, I feel like I always have to start at square one, just because, through doing all this work, your childhood and the way you were raised, whether we like it or not, plays a role in who we become, right? And so like, I don't want to rehash all my whole childhood, but just a quick backstory is that I was born to teen parents. They were very young when they had me, and they were not together. So my dad was not really a part of the picture for a lot of the first parts of my life. So they've done some studies that have come out that said that children of teen and adolescent parents grow up with all sorts of fun little issues that don't necessarily hit kids brought up by more. Oh,
keep going.
Older,
Sorry.
more mature parents. So I wasn't a very confident child. My dad wasn't really around. I had very young parents, and I wouldn't say was the most stable. So I really struggled with confidence. And also on top of that, I'm what you call a highly sensitive person, which means I was a highly sensitive child, which we also require. Highly sensitive children require a little bit more nurturing and understanding. And so I think just the combination of all of it was the perfect storm for someone to grow up with a substance use, because I wasn't around partying, but I could never figure out like why I became a drinker until I started doing this work. And it was like the highly sensitive, the absent dad, the teen parents, like it all started to come together. So I started to drink at 15, which I don't know, like to me, that feels really young. Maybe not to some, but 15, like to me, you're still pretty young. And I immediately was hooked. It got me out of my head. It got me confidence. I just immediately found love with the way it made me feel. So I was 15 when I started, and that was it. It was like I was opening the floodgates. I started partying after that, but nothing like crazy, nothing where I felt like it was too much. Through high school was just drinking on the weekends. And then when I graduated high school, I was partying. That is all I knew what to do for fun, though. I will say I did not do anything other than party. That's just what we did. We drank, we went to concerts, and that's what I did. And I would say it wasn't long before I was drinking pretty heavily. Like I've never been a casual drinker, I would say. Like I liked to drink from the first time I tried it, like from the jump. But I think when you're young and in your early 20s, everyone else, or who at least the people I was surrounding myself with, everyone else was drinking the same. So it didn't really feel like I was doing anything in excess more than anyone else. And then, my motherhood journey, it's funny because it started very early. I was 23, actually, in the heyday of my partying days.
Yeah.
And I met my now husband at a garage party. I was drunk when I met him. Yeah. And we were pregnant and married within 6 months of knowing each other.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was like I met him in March, and then we were married and already pregnant with our first child by October of the same year. And I was nowhere near ready to be a mother and a wife. Neither one. I wasn't ready for either one. But we decided to get married because we thought, that's what we should do. But we were both heavy partiers. So what happened is I got married, had the baby, and still tried to keep up my drinking, partying ways. And that is crazy in and of itself. But then it's like we're told by society that alcohol is what we should be doing to deal with being a wife and being a mom. So then it was like, oh, well, this is actually fine. Like this, they tell me, mommy, wine, juice, whatever, like it was just so easy to rationalize what I was doing. And then I got into, you know, a group of mom friends, and we all kind of just used alcohol. We would like have play dates and be drinking, and I don't know, I just surrounded myself. We just all drink. That's what we did. And so then it was, but I was struggling. Like my anxiety was through the roof. I was constantly blacking out. Like I think like blacking out was like a weekly occurrence for me, like on the weekends, but I still rationalized it. Like I chalked it up always to just a good, fun, successful even night, you know. It's like I had to wake up the next day and be like, oh shoot, like what happened last night? Like, haha, hee hee. Like it was like rationalized. But 3 years after I had my first, I got pregnant again, had another one. And so then I have 2 children now, and I'm still trying to drink and cope with being a mom, cope with being a wife. And it was just so hard. My anxiety was through the roof, like I mentioned, and just slowly over time, it started to become unbearable. I started fighting with my husband a lot, like drunk fighting. You know, like I said, I was so young. I didn't even know him when I married him. And, you know, I'm trying to like get to know this man while all we did was drink together. Like that doesn't really, you know, conduce a very strong relationship either. And I don't know. I was really trying to juggle it all, but slowly over time, the drinking just got more and more and more frequent. And like, I would start drinking and I wouldn't stop until I would like fall asleep. Like that started to happen, like where I almost couldn't not drink once I started. Like I would take the first drink and then the next drink would order. That's what they say, would order whatever. And then in 2017, my husband and I were in a really, really hard, dark patch. We actually ended up almost separating. And I had what I would call like an alcohol-induced nervous breakdown. I ended up being hospitalized. I was under the influence, saying a bunch of crazy stuff, and they had to basically like detain me. And so that was 2017. And you would think that that would be like a rock bottom. But, you know, I got out of the hospital and I blamed my circumstance. I blamed my husband. I blamed my childhood. I blamed everything other than, oh, maybe it's the alcohol, you know, like I couldn't handle life under the influence, but I wasn't ready to admit that it was the alcohol that was causing so many of my issues. And then, so I got out of the hospital, picked up the bottle again and kept drinking. And then in 2019, my mental health was just really, it was just in the toilet. I was suicidal. Like when I would drink, I don't know what would happen. It started to get to a point where, you know, the alcohol would go in and like depression and suicidal ideation would come out. And it was like enough. And then the fights with my husband, it reached a point where I couldn't take it anymore. So I started to get sober curious. So I actually just started so nothing like actually happened. It was like the accumulation of a million little rock bottoms, whether it was blacking out, saying things I regretted, having a panic attack. I would have panic attacks after drinking the next day. Sometimes it was just all these things that were accumulating where I couldn't take it anymore. And, so I got sober curious. I started listening to podcasts, and I was actually listening to a podcast and I really resonated with a lady's story. And it turned out that she was actually a sober coach. And I'd never heard of a sober coach before. I'd only heard of like AA and stuff. And for me personally, I know AA works really well for millions of people. I had actually tried and gone to a few meetings, and it just didn't I don't know. I didn't feel like my most comfortable there. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to try it. I'm going to reach out to this girl and I'm just going to try it. I reached out to her and I signed up for her program. And I was actually sober for 6 months last year. So that was January 1st of 2020. I did this little program and I got sober. But what had happened is I had told myself, like, I'm going to be sober for 6 months. And so what happened when the 6 months were up? I went back to drinking. I was like, oh, I'm cured. I'm fixed. Look at me. I went 6 months, like I'm cured. And it was almost like I rewarded myself. I wanted to reward myself by drinking. And it was a shit show when I went back to drinking. It's really, really true what they say is that you don't like start fresh. It's like you pick up right where you left off. I mean, it took no time at all for me to be finishing a bottle of wine without even batting an eyelash. Yeah. So what happened was last summer, it was the middle of the pandemic. We moved to wine country. The wineries were still open and were right down the street. So what did I do? I found myself essentially like living at the wineries last summer, and we would be there all day. And we moved on like a little cul-de-sac. And so we weren't really allowed to go anywhere other than the wineries and like the street. So we would be drinking with the neighbors and stuff. And so what happened was, I think in my mind, it was like, we're not driving anywhere, we're safe, like whatever. So I was just getting completely trashed with the neighbors, like on our street while our kids are all around, like just so inappropriate, but like everyone was doing it. So I joined in. But what started happening was I started blacking out like almost every weekend, Friday, Saturday into Sunday. Like I was blacking out almost every weekend, sticking my foot in my mouth, causing drama where drama didn't need to be caused. Again, started picking fights again with my husband, just gross. And then my anxiety, I wouldn't leave the house for like 3 days after a heavy night of drinking. I would be embarrassing in front of the neighbors, and I wouldn't want to like leave my own house to like see the neighbors. And it was just horrible. I went right back to that horrible, like gross cycle that I had left behind. And then there was one night where we were drinking moonshine with the neighbors, and there was about 8 hours of the night where I couldn't tell you what happened. And I woke up and my husband looked at me and he's like, you got to do something. And I was on the floor of my closet, just crying. I reached back out to my sober coach and I surrendered. I'm like, I thought I could do this. I cannot do this. I can't do that. I can't do this. I can't, I don't know. And so it was so bad that I thought I needed to like go to some sort of facility or something. And she was like, no, you're not there. Like, we can do this. So I hired my sober coach. And now tomorrow, actually, I'll be 10 months.
Wow.
Yay!
Seriously. Yeah. That is a very, I just don't, okay. So clearly this topic, I mean, thank you so much for that story. There's so many things that I want to like touch on. But most importantly is thank you for that story. Because if you do not start vocalizing, if people do not start vocalizing the details, I know that you're concerned about going, too deep into it, but if you don't start vocalizing the details of how your pain has manifested in your life and what came out of it and what happened, if we don't start painting the picture of what this actually friggin' looks like, then nobody who is going through the same thing will find that person like you did, that resonates, that it resonates for them when they listen to it and they say, shit, that's what I'm experiencing. And this woman is actually talking about it unapologetically and putting it out there. And so now I don't feel like I'm alone anymore, because so many times the crazy of what happens is sugarcoated, is grazed over. Why? Because we are taught as a society to run away from the discomfort, which is why we have the tendency to numb ourselves with substances in the first fucking place. Excuse me, I'm getting all worked up.
Right.
So thank you for being so, whatever, like I said, I'm glad I said it before, like this conversation might be triggering.
Yeah.
There are women, for example, and and I feel like I can say this to you. There are women, people, whatever, not necessarily just women. There are people who might listen to this conversation and feel not only triggered, but like a sense of judgment listening to you talk about how you have your 2 kids and you're hanging out with the group and you're all drinking and everything, but this is what addiction looks like. And addiction, stems from trauma. So thank you for, also couching it in that way, like including your background, the fact that there is a reason why you turned to alcohol. So yeah, no, seriously, because obviously obviously I have addiction in my family. I've dealt with all of this. I don't want to say from an outsider's perspective, because you probably well know from your experience that the family is dealing with it all. You're all intertwined. You're dealing with it together. You're not looking at somebody suffering from addiction from an outside perspective. There's no such thing. The person who is a part of your family that is watching you go through it is dealing with it in their own way, but they're dealing with it also. So it's important to talk about these things. And like, do you feel, I have to ask this because it was coming up for me. I mean, I don't have experience, specifically being addicted to alcohol or a substance, but it's like, completely can understand when you start to pull away from a substance, like I have been doing, pulling away from alcohol and, having told myself for so long, well, you don't have a problem, even though members, even though it could be quote hereditary and there are members of the family and like you might have that tendency, like, I don't feel like I have that problem, so on and so forth. But when I start to pull back from this substance of alcohol, it becomes very clear that there is a dependency, regardless of what level it's on. I mean, I shouldn't say regardless, because it's important to note what level you're at, right? But if it's so hard to pull back from a substance, there is a dependency there that we need to note. So my question is, like, do you feel like alcohol is just like the devil? Like, do you feel like alcohol specifically versus another substance is harder to manage your relationship with?
Yeah. Yes.
Like,
well, it's funny, as you were saying that, what was coming up for me is because like I was never what you would consider physically dependent. Like I didn't ever have like a withdrawal, like physical withdrawals or anything, but I was 150 million% emotionally addicted to it, because basically anytime I felt a feeling, alcohol was the go-to. Stress, alcohol, sad, alcohol, celebratory, alcohol, happy, alcohol, having fun, alcohol. I mean, it's like no matter what I was feeling, alcohol was the answer, good or bad. So you do develop this emotional attachment to it that's just ironclad. Like it's actually really crazy how emotionally addicted we can become to it. And I believe 100% that it's so much harder to get rid of your dependence on alcohol simply because of society and the fact that it's legal and it's in our face, it's pervasive in our culture and our society. I mean, it's everywhere you go, and not to say that it's not hard to cut like a drug addiction, because it absolutely is. But the difference is, they're not offering crack cocaine to you at the movie theater, or at, there's not little sayings like normalizing crack cocaine, but there's mommy loves wine for mom. Like there's just this pervasiveness that the messaging behind alcohol that we're constantly bombarded with. So, and there's no running from it. So it is so hard not to drink alcohol in today's world.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So yeah, I'll just drop in. So, cause this is a conversation. So I'll drop in what my experience has been. So, and many people who might eventually are listening or might eventually listen to this know that for 5 years I was in the wine industry and doing wine tastings. And the reason that I got into that was because I was pushed out of my job at 8 months pregnant with my first child and when I was like pushed out of my career and then becoming a mom at the same time was just like a major identity crisis. So I was going through a lot, probably like paired with a ton of postpartum anxiety, like so much going on. And alcohol was there for me. I can say that now. I can say that now like without a doubt. You know what I mean? Like just it's something that I can say in retrospect and know that that's exactly what it was. Even though it wasn't like, oh, it's like wasn't like my first introduction into alcohol. Of course not. There was plenty, like, similar to your story, plenty of partying. So, plenty of drinking from a young age, it being the cool thing, it being the thing that you do with your friends, it being the way that you rebel, it being the way that you cope. Especially, I think probably I drank more in my 20s, before I was with my husband, before children, obviously, in the midst of, the beginning of an accelerating career, things getting crazy and busy, and, taking the edge off, quote unquote, at the end of the day with happy hour, which was actually, 4 to 5 hours of drinking post, when you leave the office with your coworkers. So there were so many stages, right? But then there was this stage where alcohol was definitely there for me because of everything that had gone on at that point in my life. And but the opportunity to work with this company and do these wine tastings came into play. And I wouldn't say that I was like abusing alcohol or anything, but I can look at again in retrospect now and see how I was sold this idea of it being like this cool thing to do as a mom because like moms drink. And it's not the way that I specifically marketed my business continually. It's not the way that the company that I worked with very, purposely marketed the wine continuously. But the idea and that general concept was absolutely there. Absolutely there. And so just like kind of owning up to that in a way right now, probably for the first time, actually. Not that I feel like a sense of shame or anything about it particularly, because it was a part of my journey. Like this is the way we roll around here. But in retrospect, I can see things very much more clearly now. And then, but I love that you gave a term to this of sober curious, because I feel like that's where I am right now. And I have a group of friends that are in this same kind of boat, that we've been sort of dabbling with this idea. Because why? Because we can't, and you can even give us, let me know if this is what this sober curious phrase means. But I feel like for me, when you said that, it's like, oh, that's where I'm at, because I don't know if I can very clearly visualize right now a time when alcohol will be completely out of my life. I don't see it yet. But what I have done, because of just so many other forms of self-care that I have been incorporating into my life, including yoga, meditation, breath, all of that, right? Those are the 3 things that I feel like have gotten me so much more into my body, so that I can understand and very easily, maybe not always easily, but more deliberately discern when something is helping me or hurting me, when it's making me feel better or long-term making things worse. We can't see those things in many cases when we are hovering in the whirlwind of anxious thoughts in our head, and you're not in your body. So you can't really notice then. Oh, like you don't even notice sometimes, like, oh, like I'm super tired. Did that, the next day or whatever it is, for example. So did that really help me long term, or did it make things way friggin' worse, because now I am less able to cope today, than I even was last night when I had 3 glasses of wine. So I was able to start this sort of this ability to discern that. And so slowly things started to become clear. I started to cut back a little bit. This is relatively recently. And then I took October off. It's interesting that you had that October 2020 date Because I was like, that was a turning point for me as well. I took October 2020 off. And again, it was just for that month, but I could see such a difference. No alcohol first. So that was the message for me, was like, oh my God, like if I can give up alcohol for a month and see so much, see my body and everything just benefit so much, and my level of clarity and my energy level and so many things, and even like physically benefiting from this. And I haven't brought it in since then to the level that I was at all. And I'm trying now to cut back even further, where I'm really trying to only partake socially, like only, parties, celebrations. But that's what I find so interesting, is like, oh, God forbid I go to a party and not drink. So like, I guess that's, and certainly if anything that I was saying, like, some you wanted to respond to, please do. But I guess that's sort of my next question for you, for the people who are listening and thinking, I need to, cut back in some way. You touched a little bit about ways to do so, and ways and what worked for you. But like, how does it look in your day-to-day life when you're dealing with your relationships and your friends who you used to drink with, and going to parties and going to concerts? Because I feel like that is a big block for some people, where it's like, how do I even do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you do it one day at a time. Yeah. So that is the first thing. And I know it's so cliche, but that's why when we say, oh, 6 months, a month, a year, our brains just can't even like handle that. They don't like that. So the best course of action is to say, I'm going to wake up in the morning today. I'm not going to drink. And honestly, it like tricks our brain into not being so overwhelmed with the possibility of, I'm never going to have a drink again. Like, I don't even say that. I don't say that ever. I'm like, today I'm not going to have a drink
today.
But it takes practice and patience. And, I drank for 18 years. And so my brain has been hardwired to believe that I needed alcohol for anything, even to go out to eat, to anything, that I thought that I needed alcohol. And so you have to first set that intention for yourself that you're not going to drink today. And then you have to do the work. It doesn't just come from nothing. So like I said, I worked with a sober coach. So I worked with her intensely and every day for 7 months. Mm-hmm. And in that 7 months, I was a little bit of a hermit. I didn't really go and do parties and do all these big things just because I wasn't ready. I had a lot of work to do, a lot of rewiring to do, just a lot of work to do. So, I would say to manage your expectations, that you're not going to be this fun party animal overnight, that it does take time. So how long have we been drinking? I've been drinking 18 years. It's not going to take 30 days to undo all that and expect to be. I think so many people, they hope they're going to be their like fun buzz self as a sober person. And I think sometimes the hardest thing is we find out we're actually not that person. Like you actually might not be that person. So one of the most interesting things for me is that I actually found out that I'm an introvert through, and I never, if you would have asked me if I thought I was an extrovert that had just like maybe social anxiety. And that's why I use alcohol, but I am like an introvert through and through. So you have to be kind of prepared to meet the real you. Yeah. And you're going to have to relearn some things and be patient with yourself. But it takes work. I would say to actually redo your whole lifestyle, you're probably going to need a coach, a program, therapy. So I worked with my sober coach again for 7 months, privately, one-on-one. And now I'm in couples therapy, because you asked how I do the marriage. So I'm in couples therapy now. And I have my own therapist that I meet with. So the combination of the two and the sober community is what gets me through. But it's hard. And I never, ever want to sugarcoat that, like ever.
Yes.
Because it is hard work. But what's the alternative? The alternative for me was to continue the way I was, which was, not being able to stick to any sort of health, because you had mentioned, you know, self-care and healthy, and like I always wanted to be this healthy self-care person, but I was falling asleep in my makeup like all the time, so that's not healthy. It's dehydrates you beyond any measure. You can't keep muscle tone when you drink a lot. It was like the opposite of self-care for so many reasons. And then if you just get into the science of what alcohol does to your body. Yeah.
Crazy.
So, and then I know you were saying like, you've been on this journey and like, you know, meditation, and for me, I always try to do that too, but they say that alcohol takes you away from yourself. It doesn't connect you. It actually like disconnects you from your real self. So it's actually almost like they just don't work together if you're on like a true self journey. You know what I mean? Like it's really hard to be truly healthy and in tune with your authentic self and drink all the time.
Yeah. A lot of conversations I've had about this, people will talk about how it lowers your vibration, right? And so that's like, you know, like people like to, some people are comfortable with that, like going in that direction with it. Some people are like, I don't know what the hell that means. But it is anything that is not enhancing your health, your wellness, I should say, in some way that is actually hurting your level of wellness. And I don't mean just your physical health. I don't mean just like your bodily inner workings and like you said, your skin, your hair, your and how you look. If it's not long-term enhancing your connection to self, your spiritual wellness, your emotional wellness, as well as all the other stuff, then it is definitely a low vibe activity. So, I'm just putting it out there because I feel like there are people sometimes who wonder why they're just in this like whirlwind or, sort of hamster wheel of this shit is just always happening to me, and it's just like this sort of continual one thing after another. This, it's one thing after another, all this, never a dull moment, or I can't get a break, or and so on and so forth. And it's like, okay, we have to look at what we're doing. We have to look, like you said, at our practices. What type of practices do we have going on in our lives? We also, at the same time, it's like you can't shame yourself either. Because what was coming up for me when you were talking about, there's so many reasons why people drink, right? And especially in motherhood, I feel like so many of us are thrown as mothers, right? We are thrown into this world of motherhood where we have to be perfect. There's so much friggin' pressure on mothers these days, especially if you pay attention to everything that you're being fed constantly about what motherhood is supposed to look like. If you're absorbing all of that, there is so much pressure on you, first of all. Second of all, you're also put into this new category of mom. So maybe your non-mom friends or your previous circle is not as connected. You're maybe not as connected with anymore. So now you got this new group that you're trying to connect with, trying to create a new tribe of mom friends, right? And then when you try to do that, anxiety sets in, new beginnings of all sorts, and people drink to curb their anxiety. So that kind of brings us to the topic of just like general, like self-medicating, right? And what was coming up for me, like right before we even hopped on, was just like, well, shit, I talk so much about self-care, and I try to do my best about just being honest and truthful about how it's not easy. It's not easy, especially as a mother, when you're trying to put the needs of your children first. It's very hard sometimes to find this space to prioritize your own wellness and do what you got to do for you. But shit, if you want to find a very direct and deliberate way to start prioritizing your self-care, find the ways in which you are self-medicating and look at that as your very first way to your first step towards self-care. Because if you take away the self-medicating and the time and money and energy that you put into whatever that is for you, and it could be alcohol, it could be food, it could be so many, it could be scrolling your phone, it could be just technology in general or binge watching or whatever it is. And if you take away that, there's all that time and money and energy that you would spend doing that, that you could spend time remembering, like you were saying before, like remembering who the hell you actually are without those things. So if you took away, and not overnight, like you were saying, it doesn't happen overnight, but if you just took that as your one act of self-care, your only job, right? Self-care is my job. If over the next 6 months you made that just, that's it, that's your only job, your you job. I always talk about that in my workshops, like the fact that you have, as a mom, you have your your motherhood job, like that's one job. You have your job, probably, if you have a full-time job or a part-time job or whatever it is, that's your other job. But what about the job of this? This is a job too, because we're not like, oh, okay, like we're adults now, like we're totally self-sufficient, and self-sustaining without any support whatsoever. No, like you still need to be supported, and we have to do it for ourselves now. We're adults now. We have to do it for ourselves. So it's a job. So what if just over, like I said, over the next 6 months of your job of self-care is literally just to take a look at the ways in which you self-medicate and see how aware you can get about it, and see with ways in which we can pull back there. Because you can't skip steps. Like you were saying, you can't start to draw all this good and make these big changes and start doing yoga and start meditating and start your breath work and pull all this wonderful self-care into your life if you're exhausted because of whatever you ate or drank the night before or whatever it is. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Right.
Well, like you were saying, like, yeah, go ahead.
For me, like self-care, when I think about self-care, I think about intentionality. I think about self-care. You have to be proactive to take care of yourself. And for me, at least, alcohol made me complacent. It's complacent AF. House is a mess.
That was the whole point, right? The whole point was to just numb you completely, and so that there would be no need to do anything else, because everything was okay.
Yep, that's the whole purpose of it. That's right. But what happens is, when you get complacent about your whole entire life, complacence does not breed excellence in any capacity. You know what I mean? So just when you were saying that, that's what was coming up for me, is like how it's such an intentional thing to take care of ourselves. And when you're complacent and checked out, there is no self-care. It's very hard to balance it all. So anyway, sorry, that's just what came to my head.
Do not apologize. Like I said, we flow on this show.
Okay,
and,
all right.
And that's how we go.
Well, and too, I think with alcohol, like when it comes to motherhood too, is like a lot of the times we use alcohol to numb out the hard parts of our lives and motherhood. But the fact is, and this is something that I try to not have be a fact, but the fact is we cannot numb out the hard and difficult parts of motherhood without, unfortunately, simultaneously numbing out some of the important and the good parts. We actually, when we drink, we cannot select what we're numbing out. It just all gets numbed out, all of it.
That is literally like the most important thing, because it's not, and I do want to, totally go deeper into the motherhood aspect of this, but, also noting the fact that you're numbing your pain, but you're numbing your true essence. So aside from numbing out what good you could be doing, the good acts and words and everything you could be passing on to your children, you're numbing your true essence. So you're like dimming your light to like entirely, because we can't, like you said, you can't just numb one piece. So I do want to share too, with the importance of disclosure, like, like how does this look, when I gave up for a month alcohol in October, and then I did it again in January. And like I said, it was so eye-opening for me. But when I brought it back in, it gave me an ability to see the difference, to discern, like I was talking about, like to really notice the details of how it was affecting my life and my relationships when I would just have one glass of wine. at night, you know?
Right.
And so one of the things that I noticed is that if I had, a hard, long day with the kids and I'm like, I deserve a glass of wine. Okay. Pour the glass of wine, drink the glass of wine while I'm cooking dinner or whatever. And now my patience for my children is not enhanced.
No.
It's depleted even more.
Yes.
So now I'm nasty.
Yep.
I'm going to be completely, I'm going to be completely open about it. Now, not only was I already stressed and I'm already short with them, at minimum, right? At minimum, I'm short with them by that point, 5 o'clock, whatever it is. I might have already even lost it at one point or twice. And now I'm irritable, even more so after dinner, during bedtime, And so I noticed that. And then coming at it from the other way, on the nights where I would say have like my energy drink at 5 instead of the glass of wine, not only would I obviously have more patience into bedtime where I could read that book to my daughter and actually like enjoy it, and actually enjoy even after the whole friggin' day of virtual learning and whatever the hell else went on, I'm still enjoying reading that book before she goes to sleep. And, even partaking in the choosing of the book, like things like that, where I'd be like, all right, like, get the book. Come, did you pick a book? I'm tired. The difference in how that shows up in their lives, in their world, is unbelievable. So just noticing that complete paradox, like, it was so apparent to me. So I'm just needed to put that out there for the people who are like, oh, could I give it up for a month? Like it would put things potentially into perspective. And that is just, that's how you gain awareness. And I just don't think you can make any real change unless you first gain that awareness.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it is so true. Alcohol, it even 1 glass, 2 glasses, it just has a way of making it me, my time. This is now my time, me. Because I would feel the same thing. Like it's supposed to make me feel better, but oh my gosh, my kids would sound louder, like, more irritating. And I'm just like, go away. Like I have my wine. I want to watch my show. Like it doesn't. And if I feel like it's such a hard thing to acknowledge, and I'm so glad that you did, but it does. It makes you almost like begrudging, like towards your kid. You know what I mean? Like it just has a way, and they're like bothering me. How dare they be bothering me while it's wine time, And so it's interesting because the nighttime routines for me are now not always pleasant, not always the best, still stressful, still loud, still annoying. So, but it's my attitude is so much like, because I have nothing better to be doing. And in my mind before, drinking wine was better. It felt better, and now it's like, and how sad, like how sad, like my kids didn't ask for that, it's like they almost become like an inconvenience to us when we're drinking. And, I think kids deserve better.
Yeah. They completely do. They completely do. And it's like, and again, like you said, to be clear, like, is every night, just because you give up drinking, is every night going to be like, oh my God, let me tuck you in. And like, no, you're going to still, of course, have, so, the thing that led you to want to numb out could very well still be there. But then I think, I'm able to look at, once you are able to step back and look at it for what it is, now you can decide, even if you are there and your level of stress is still up and you're not really like present, then you're able to find other self-care practices that can support you. I always talk about, like, you have self-care, which can be either self-soothing or self-preservation. So you have self-preservation, that you're, things that you do for yourself so that you can sustain, right? So that's like your long-term stuff. And then you, of course, need also to have self-soothing practices, things that you do that are your go-to when shit hits the fan and you are stressed. Like, you need those too. You need to call a friend, or you need to be able to say, Mommy needs a break.
Yes.
Mommy needs to go put her head down for 15 minutes, or mommy needs to go cry for 15 minutes or 20 or whatever it is, right? And it's important because when you put those self-soothing practices in, you are modeling for your children a healthy way to cope.
Right.
And when you are self-medicating, you're modeling numbing out.
Right.
And again, this isn't about trying to shame anybody. It's literally, like, obviously, like, this is a process. You can't turn this switch off. And this shit has been ingrained in us. It's a part of our day-to-day for a reason. It's programmed in there. But the good news is that it's completely possible to slowly but surely make these changes.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's where, so I've had to obviously trade out my nightly wine for other things, and it's a journey, but there are things that actually have, long-term benefits, and they're not going to deplete me and make me feel worse in the long term, because that's the thing with alcohol. Yes, it absolutely helps in the short term and the temporary. It for sure is a quick fix. It's an easy escape, and it does its job, some of the time. But the thing is the fact of it is alcohol is a highly addictive substance, and you drink it enough, you're going to become dependent on it in some way. And I've had to learn how to cope with these. So I would go for a walk, I take a bath. But the thing is about getting sober is it, like I said earlier, it forces you to get to know who you really are and what your needs actually are. And when you know that about yourself and you know what makes you feel better, you can then advocate for yourself in a way that I never was able to when I was drinking, because I didn't know what the hell would make me feel better,
Right. How do I ask for what I need if I don't even know what the hell I need?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And as someone who's a highly sensitive person, I can get overstimulated very easily. So I have educated my family on who I am and what I need. And so now we all know if I'm starting to get like a certain way, either my husband can take the kids, I go for a drive, and I come back and I'm still mommy. I'm not drunk mommy. I'm not checked out mommy. I'm me, and everyone's needs got met. And we're all better for it. And I'm still here and I'm present. Now let's fix it. Let's move on. Yeah. Whereas I think when we drink, we just prolong our suffering, and whatever it is that we're drinking about, it's still going to be there when we sober up. It doesn't go away, So this has actually allowed me to, like you said, like adopt healthy coping mechanisms. And, things aren't perfect, but everything's figure outable when you're sober, because it forces you to get through everything just head on, Yeah.
Which we can all do. I know that people, I know that it's hard sometimes to be prepared, really, really prepared to address like the elephant in the room, because I think that's the thing, right? You stop numbing and running away from the things that are stressing you out. Those things could be very big things. Those things could be, a dysfunctional relationship. Those things could be trauma from your childhood. Those could be very freaking big things when you really dig down to what it actually is. And that's why I'm so happy that you mentioned doing the work, and it is hard and it does take time, but it's completely doable. Like, I am with you. And I'm so glad that you also mentioned therapy and seeing a counselor. Like, I talk all the time in my group on this show about the importance of therapy. I'm such a massive advocate for it.
Everybody needs therapy.
Everybody needs a therapist.
Everybody.
Like, done. End of sentence. Goodbye, everybody. That's it. Right. That's the last thing. Like, honestly, it's so important. And it's like, and the larger point, of course, being like, you do not have to do this alone. Like, there is no reason, or even like, it's probably not going to work if you try to do this alone anyway. 100%. So don't even try,
No. No, there are millions of people who have struggled with alcohol. Millions. You're in good company if you have.
Yeah. Not alone. 100%.
Not even close.
So I'm just looking at my list of questions that you were so awesome to ask me to prepare. Like I said, thank you for challenging me to do that, because I do tend to flow on this show. and you did talk a lot about the benefits that you experienced, like, having, whether it was having to do with your body, and we talked a lot about like your relationships and stuff. Um,
One that I really want to mention really quick, just because
yeah,
you had talked about like anxiety.
yeah,
So, so I have anxiety. I'm like an anxious person naturally. And because I'm an introvert and didn't know it, I obviously would struggle in crowds and stuff. But for a long time, I drank to soothe my anxiety, thinking I would help, was helping. But I just wanted to say, and we can't ignore science.
yeah,
And one really incredible tool in getting in, if you're sober curious and you're wondering if you're into self-care and wondering, start doing this science research. Like it really helps motivate you. But the thing is when our bodies break down the ethanol in our system, like the next day, when we're breaking down the alcohol, our systems actually release cortisol and adrenaline. It floods our system as we're breaking down. So I don't know if you've experienced like a very anxious hangover.
yeah. Well, you know what? I would wake up, and again, another thing that I noticed only after taking breaks, so that I could actually discern and actually notice when these things would happen, is I would wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety.
The witching hour.
Yeah, totally, and
Yeah.
sweating. And I'm like, what? And so and it's so interesting that you're saying this, because we used to chalk it up to me and my mom, we would talk about, what is that?
Yeah.
And we used to chalk it up to the
Science.
sugar. So you're like, it's science.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's your body's beginning to break down the alcohol. So usually that happens while we're sleeping. We drink and then we're sleeping and our bodies start to have to process it. And it literally, our systems are getting flooded with cortisol, stress, adrenaline, anxiety. And so we are creating anxiety for our bodies. And so somebody who's a sensitive, highly sensitive person, that's why I was having the panic attacks and I couldn't figure it out. So here I am. You want to talk about a hamster wheel? Yeah. There are so many of us out there that have anxiety and we drink to soothe it, not even knowing that we are creating it. We're making it worse. We're intensifying it. We're creating it. And like, my heart just for people that drink to soothe anxiety, I just feel so bad because I will say that I was medicated for anxiety for a long time and I no longer am on medications anymore because I'm sober.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Like I've had friends and family who have experienced that exact thing, that like didn't realize that it's actually anxiety is being induced, is being induced by alcohol.
Yeah.
And
vicious cycle.
Yeah, there's so much that can also be said, right, about like, like why there are why there aren't regulations around alcohol when it's so dangerous and so on and so forth, and why is it, but I think having these conversations it has to start here. We have to start becoming aware as a collective and starting to raise our hand in certain areas and in certain spaces and talk about these things in order for it to even be, heard on a larger spectrum. And also, we're not, we talk, I talk so much about the marketing and the promotion of this and the programming and the conditioning and all of that. And I think it's important because a lot of people aren't aware of that stuff. However, we're not a slave to it. We don't have to be a slave to it. Like I said, that awareness is it's like the key to the door. All you have to do is become aware of, holy shit, you're right. Like, I was literally taught that like, you gotta drink when you go to the party. You gotta drink when you turn 21. You gotta do this and that. And you're not fun. I mean, please, I don't want to get into a whole nother like, offshoot, but my husband doesn't drink, never has. And when we met when I was 23, I'm just like, whoa, going back. When we met when I was 23, I totally judged him completely and wondered how on earth I could date this guy who I liked if he doesn't drink. And so then, even once I got over it, my friends were like, how are you dating this guy who doesn't drink? And then when they got over it, my family was like, how are you dating this guy that doesn't drink? it was like a never ending. So that's how weird this is that sobriety is weird. Which when you think about it, like this, it's problematic to say the least. And it's an example of why this is a paradigm. This is a pattern that isn't, that this is a negative pattern. This isn't helpful. This isn't healthy overall, but we can shift it. We just have to become aware.
Right. I used to have this saying when I was a big drinker. I'd be like, there's two kinds of people I hate. Drunk people when I'm sober, and sober people when I'm drunk. And I'd be like, ha, 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 ha. Like, but it's this way that we really do shame like sobriety and sober. And it is like, we group it with, you're a wet blanket. If you don't drink, you're a wet blanket. And that's the message that we've all heard and received and believe.
Yeah.
You know, and it's an uphill battle to because you're not that woo person. Sober, most people are not.
Yeah.
But what's really helped me is to like really realize that most people aren't woo. That like when I'm around people and they're acting like that, and I'm like, well, they have a substance that's helping them. Like they're not really like that either. No, that's why they're drinking, because they're not like that naturally, you know. But it's the messaging, but it's like you said, it's just the awareness. And also I think it's like important to normalize being able to change our minds when presented with new information, and like just normalize being open and normalize being honest with yourself. Like take an honest look at yourself. I feel like denial is it's so much easier to live in a place of denial, especially when we're drinking. It's just the two go hand in hand. But just, I would say, normalize just having an honest look at your life. And don't be afraid of that, because it's the only way to grow. I always say growth and denial cannot coexist. And so in order to grow, you have to first acknowledge, you know, and it's okay. It's okay. No one's perfect. And if you're having trouble, you know, managing a highly addictive substance, there's nothing wrong with you. It's normal. The substance is doing what it's supposed to do, you know? I just think that people feel so shamed around this idea, but like, I just want to shout to the world, it's a highly addictive substance. It's a drug. It actually is. It's just a legal drug. Yeah. You know? So,
and then there's
I could go on forever.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm thinking the same thing. I'm like, oh God, there's so much to talk about.
So much.
There are so many layers to that. And I just have to put this out there for anybody who's like thinking it. It's like, like the labeling and the stigmas around like, okay, so it's kind of like, okay, so you're saying I'm an alcoholic, you know, or I'm not an alcoholic. So because everybody has this view of what an alcoholic is, and then they have the stigma that's associated with it. And then they have this whole nother, this whole nother story that we've been told about how it's an illness. And so we associate it with like it being like a mental illness now. But the thing is that once we start, and we do that, I think we started to call it meant like an illness or a disease, like almost like it's mental illness, to destigmatize, which is great because we do need to destigmatize. But now you're taking like the power out of the person, because now I'm just like, I have a disease.
Oh, girl.
I know. We just opened a whole can of worms. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. No, it's good, because that's actually, so in AA, the first thing you have to say is, hi, I'm Amanda, I'm an alcoholic.
Yep.
Right. To me, that felt very disempowering. I don't like labels at all for anything else. So why am I going to label myself anything? So, you know, for me, it was like, stop asking yourself if you're an alcoholic. Ask yourself if alcohol is causing problems in your life. Like, who cares if you're an alcoholic? I mean, what's the label? But what's the point of that? For me, and so that's why in my coaching, we learned about empowered sobriety, because in AA, they teach you that you are powerless to alcohol. You are powerless. You will always be powerless. And the thing that I liked and adopted was, I'm not powerless. I am in control. I make the choice. So I personally don't identify with the disease model. I identify with the choice model, which is a little bit brutal. It's hard. It's hard to say, it was a choice. I chose to be that way, because for me personally, I like to be in personal responsibility. So the disease model and the powerless alcoholic, that didn't work for me personally. So that's another thing. There are so many ways to recovery. It doesn't matter how you get there, just get there, whatever feels good to you. And to some people, to say they have a disease, that feels better. I have a disease. I'll always have a disease, and it keeps them sober. So good for them. For me, it's I'm in control. I'm in power. I make the choice. Right. And for me, that's more empowering. Personally.
Oh, I am so glad we touched on that. We might have to do this again.
We might have to do this about a few things, right? There's so many.
Part 1.
Right. There's just so many facets to sobriety. And because we all drink for different reasons, but kind of the same reason, and then there's so many ways to get sober. There's so many benefits to it. There's so many negatives to it. I mean, we could be here all week.
Okay. Well, that's okay. I'm willing to do this again.
Let's do it.
Oh my goodness. Cause so I want to, kind of start to bring it to a close.
Right.
So reeling it back in, first of all, thank you again. Like, you have no idea. Like I said, this topic, it's been making my skin crawl. Like, I got to talk about it. We got to get this out in the open. We got to normalize these conversations. And yeah, like, I know that there are just so many people who are, maybe even scratching the surface of that, sober curious right. area, because of this just like giant collective awakening everyone's experiencing. I know it. But I want to know from you, because self-care is my job. That's what we talk about here. So you talked about therapy, you talked about, intentionality, you talked, because I feel like that's a practice in itself. Like, tell me if you have like not maybe even a daily non-negotiable self-care practice, or maybe it's weekly, especially like in the world of mothering and how tough it can be to prioritize, right? Like, what's your go-to? What are some things that you really recommend and that you do?
Pilates.
Ooh, nice.
Pilates. So I found Pilates before I got sober, but I couldn't be consistent with it because I was constantly canceling because I was hungover or whatever. And when I was drinking too, I was a little too like all over the place to really fall in love with the mindfulness and the connect, just all of it. So Pilates has been life-changing for me in sobriety. I go daily if I can. Also practicing gratitude for me. So it doesn't happen every day. I'm not going to pretend like I'm some perfect, but I try to wake up and write down, or at the very least think of 3 things that I'm grateful for. And I have found that gratitude, I feel like when we're drinking, especially to relieve stress or whatever, it actually can make us like, what's the word? It can make us like, I don't even know. Yeah, we can laser focus on all the things that are going wrong. Poor me, woe is me. This is so hard. You kind of get into this, like, I don't know. To me, alcohol just it's very like self-involved. It can make you very
it induces and enhances an existing sense of victimhood. So if and that's why when you talked about being empowered versus taking away the power, that's probably why that worked for you so much better, is because if we're not, if it's not like you have the power to make this change, then you're still in victimhood.
Right. Right.
So,
yeah. So
gratitude absolutely would flip that around.
Pilates. And now I am able to feel like I eat and drink. I drink a ton of water and I eat really well. And it's like, I'm just able to like balance. Like, everything was so extreme one way or the other. Like when I was drinking, there was such these extremes where I've really just like been able to find balance in my life. And there's like this just harmony. Everything just feels so much more harmonious, because if I say I'm going to be here at a certain time, I'm there. at a certain time. If I say I'm going to go to a 6 a.m. workout, I'm there. You know what I mean? So I've just been able to incorporate all these healthy rituals that I've wanted to for so long, but just couldn't. I don't know. Does that answer the question?
Yes, 100%, because you're talking
Okay.
about self-discipline. And
Yes.
I have found that 100%. I mean, I feel like only in the past couple of years, like that I've gotten to this point where in some practices I have that very specific, deliberate self-discipline. And now where it's like, I'm doing this, like, you know, nothing is changing it. I'm not going to be swayed. I'm not going to be convinced out of it. I'm not going to be distracted out of it. This is what I'm doing. And I feel like that is like, self-discipline is like how you regain your self-love, your true self-love, because you are like prioritizing yourself to like an nth degree at that point. It's like radical self-care. I feel like self-discipline, when it's like, this is happening. Like,
Yeah.
Beautiful. I love it.
Self-awareness and discipline is like the most radical form of self-love. Being honest with yourself is self-love. Because like I said, in order to get to our true and best selves, there has to be a growth process. And to even begin the growth process, there has to be an acknowledgement process. And it's all self-love. It feels hard and scary, but it is, you are loving yourself when you can call yourself out on your own bullshit.
Yes, 100%. Hallelujah. I have one last question. How are you celebrating when you get to a year? Because you're close.
Oh my gosh. So this is something that I've been thinking. I know it's only 2 months away, which I cannot believe, by the way. If someone would have freaking told me that this girl, like the party girl of all party girls, I used to joke that Chardonnay is my blood type. Like, if you would have told me I was going to come up on a year sober, I just would have laughed at you. Like, I never would have believed it. But I think, and don't quote me on this because I might have a panic attack and not do it, but I think I want to go skydiving.
Yes.
Because it's like facing your fears, like the whole, like it just all goes hand in hand. I
highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. I've done it.
You've done it?
And it was a long time ago, but I've been dying to do it again ever since. I highly recommend it.
Because other than heights being like a biggest fear, existing in a world without my security blanket of alcohol was the scariest thing. And I fucking conquered that. So now I have to conquer heights.
Yes. Go, girl. I love it. Thank you so much. Like, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for what you're doing as far as just spreading this awareness. But for this conversation, like, I needed to have this conversation just for me. And I know that there are going to be people who are going to be, you know, I always say, like, even if we just plant a little seed in the back of your head, save it for later, it'll come up again, I'm sure. You know what I mean? So even if it's just that, it's big, you know.
There's a quote from one of my favorite sober books. I'm going to get it wrong, but it's something like, if there's a voice, no matter how tiny and quiet it is, that tells you there might be another way to live, listen. If you have a voice, just listen to that voice. Yeah.
So perfect. Thank you again so much. I'm going to close us out because I don't want my computer to die. Okay. But this has been great. I hope we could do it again.
Yeah, I would love to.
Tell everybody one last time where to find you on Instagram.
You can find me at Sober Musings with Mandy.
Perfect.